Well, welcome to Leadership in Action. I'm Renee Meddy, partner at Orca HR, and I'm here with our CEO, Paul O'Byrne. And if you're new to the show, we show up weekly on Thursdays for 15 minutes to share common leadership challenges with actionable tips that you can implement right away. And today, Paul and I will be talking about navigating change for leaders. So, Paul, what have you seen in either back when you were in corporate or with people you work with now around how leaders navigate change and what's worked and what hasn't worked?
Yeah, I think one of the things people who have a good handle in terms of being able to lead change understand that it's not just a process in terms of just getting all of the process steps right, but it's also understanding how you connect with people and get them engaged in the change. And, like they sort of say, people, it's not people don't like change, because I think change is always inevitable. I think people don't like being changed. So I think the more you can engage people up front in what, we used to have a program called Defining Your Desirable Future. And so it's helping people connect to a future vision of something that may be different today and help them navigate. But if they're also involved in the best way to sort of define a future is to create it together. And so I think those people who really understand change understand there's a very psychological aspect of people bringing people through change, and then being able to understand that, you have to create a future that is maybe different than what it is today, help people understand what that is, and then help them navigate towards that. But also understand that it is a psychological transition for many people, because
well, I think that piece of it is important to share, because the psychological piece brings us to the 4 A's of that first level of awareness. So some people, like we've seen on our team, right? Like I love and embrace variety, change, right?
Yes.
But we've also worked with people that need to know how things have worked in the past. So you have to understand you have to understand yourself, because if I'm a person that loves change and I throw at my staff like all these changes, which I used to do, not realizing like, oh, not everybody is open.
It can deal with it the same way as you.
Yeah, and not only that, it create like what it can create for each individual person. So when whether it's through personality assessments, it's a variety of things, right? Personality assessment, one-on-ones, really knowing who your team is, who your leaders are, and understanding how do they perceive change? What does that mean to them? What's their like signature stress response? Are they avoiding stuff? Do they fight back? Do they freeze? And then for each individual person, because that will impact how you communicate change and how often you make changes depending on the size of your organization.
Yeah, and one tool that's really helped us, and not just us, but like working with other organizations around exactly what you were talking about is DISC is really good at helping understand how different people communicate and how they like to be communicated with, right? And like some people, as you, can deal with a level of ambiguity, you can live in that space. You could also be a person who's very driven by change, right? There are other people who are much more uncomfortable with change and they prefer a steady state environment.
And they want the details, right?
Right. And then there's other people who really need the details.
Yeah.
I remember working with an executive, and they were going through a major change. And he said, like he was the CEO and he had all his executives in the room. We had done a whole sort of DISC team report, and we had done individual DISC with each one of them. So we were able to see what communication styles different people had. And there's a really cool tool in the DISC thing, which is a wheel, and it sort of shows where people are on this particular wheel. Well, this CEO sort of said, well, how come I can't understand why the hell it's not clear to you there are just three things in relation to our strategy, right? And so then he sort of looked at this view of all the different communication styles, and he said, okay, those people who need more detail, what are you missing? And they said, well, we're missing exactly what's going to stay the same and what's going to change. We need, when is it going to happen? You know, when do you expect all of these changes? So they needed a hell of a lot more detail, right?
Yeah. See, and that gives me a whole lot of adrenaline, like, ooh, what's happening?
Right. And for the first time, he really understands why, just because he was communicating, you know, here's the three strategic initiatives that we have, that people were not getting them, because he understood, as you said, some people need a lot more detail than others, you know?
Yeah.
So when you sort of paint that future, you have to understand that some people are going to more information, and communicating is so critical in those early stages. So, and getting people involved in creating that change destination. Because, you know, we sort of say you'll pay now or pay later. Because if you don't do that, and then you try to initiate the change, well, then what you're going to have is people may not be on board.
Yeah.
And especially if you need them to be on board with the change.
Yeah.
So think about, you know, when you're, as a leader, if you're going through change, the first thing is who needs to be able to execute on this change. Well, if the people who need to execute on this change are not involved in the change, it's going to be much more difficult.
Yeah.
You know,
and I think that's where the emotional intelligence part that kind of gets glossed over, but is actually the foundation that all of that is sitting on, because you have to understand that if you're aware, if each person is aware of, you know, where their strengths are, what, you know, is more of a growth edge for them, what causes reactivity or activation in their system, because they, I totally lost my train of thought. Once you understand yourself really well, you're not going to take things as personally. So there's like this other assessment that I use, similar to the Myers-Briggs, but it's a very shortened version of it. It's David Kiersey's typology, but it gives you the same letters. Like I'm an ENFP and my husband's an INTJ. And so what would cause friction in our relationship, I only learned recently because of the NT in there. Like, and I know this part about his brain, like he sees things in a completely different way than I do, personally, professionally. And so NTs can really see the big picture, but they require a lot of like their kind of value system for an NT is competency. So they can see holes, and that like they literally look at the world seeing all the holes in the problems. Well, so when you are someone that's a feeler and you're living with someone that's an NT, I get questioned a lot because they're like, he wants details. He's constantly seeing the holes. But what I learned recently was that the reason it would upset me is because I take it personally. So once I understood that when people question me, that can kind of be a reactive point for me, not as much now because I'm aware of it, but it's a reactive point because I'm like, oh, you don't trust me. And for him, it's like, there is no personalization at all. He's strictly looking at it as like an objective problem to solve. And so, and there's only like 1 or 2% of people in the world that are NTs, but that's a huge shift to realize like, and it still will bother me sometimes, but then I remember, and we can joke about it and be like, put your NT away. Like, I don't have these details.
But that's right. And so I think it's really understanding that. And I think one of the things is a lot of leaders jump into change without kind of like stepping back and saying, okay, what is the landscape that I'm coming in? What discovery do I need even before I start to change? Who are the people in my organization? Who needs to be communicated in more detail? So the more that they're both aware themselves and then aware of the people or communication styles and stuff like that, that can really help. And, there are certain stages around when you're creating change. Like the first one is defining that future or defining the change destination. But I always believe if you engage people in defining that destination, you're going to have a much better result afterwards. And then it's around that initiating commitment. So you're sort of building that case for change. Mm-hmm. And so that it requires a lot of communications. And then you have to think about, okay, what is my plan? And in that, like, so for example, you know, who are the stakeholders that are going to be involved that being impacted? You know, so like one of the things that we talk about is developing a sort of a stakeholder map. Okay, who's impacted by all of this, right? And sort of saying, how are they impacted? Who's going to have gains and who's going to have losses? Because one of the things when you're managing change is you have to be able to support those people who feel a loss out of this change and those people who feel a gain out of this change.
Yeah.
And so that's also really important, you know? Yeah. And then understanding what are potential obstacles that around the particular change. And then it's around sort of building support. And then one of the things that I have found is a lot of people, you know, it used to be the classic thing in Microsoft, we'd have all these major changes. And so people would think, okay, we have communicated the change. So they would send out an email and say, you know, the following reorganization is going to happen and stuff like that. So-and-so is going to be reporting to this. We're moving this division over. And then they would say, well, we've done it, right? But one of the things that I think a lot of leaders often forget is after the change has happened, you have to continue to reinforce either the new behaviors or, you know, what is the new scenarios or what is the new place, and continue to reinforce and monitor it, and sometimes even make adjustments and changes even afterwards, you know, because if you continue to force it and say, okay, well, we've done this and we're done this, and you're not sort of stepping back and saying, okay, well, how did this work, you know? And I have seen changes are very costly where they've had to be completely reversed.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
Right? And that then also then creates a whole sort of level of ambiguity and uncertainty for some people, you know?
Well, so the trust, it's not even just, you know.
No, and yes, and trust is really important, you know? Yeah. So like, you know, sort of, I think if we were to boil it down to 3 steps, it's sort of set a clear vision and engage people in creating that desirable future. Communicate with transparency, you know, and then be empathetic to different people as they move through this change, you know, and then you have to support and adapt.
Yeah.
And so, you know, what are the things that you need to do to help people adapt, and where do you may have to adapt your, you know, change or your process based on feedback that the system is telling you.
Mm-hmm. I think a great topic for another call when you were talking is the transparency piece, because I have a lot of calls around that. Like, depends on the size of the organization, where you are in leadership, what information you have, and what is okay to share and not to share.
Yes. And when do you share, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you have to manage that carefully because, you know, we used to talk about when do we bring certain people into the tent and how do we do it?
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
I remember having a great conversation with a leader who said to me, oh, I communicated XY to my teams while all hell broke loose, right?
Yeah.
Because he hadn't really thought about what the consequences of it were.
Yeah.
And he hadn't sort of planned for it, or he hadn't really thought about, okay, what is the impact if I communicate too early when I don't even have all the answers myself?
Yeah.
You know? Mm-hmm. And so I think, one of the key things I would say to leaders is you have to be in a good emotional state yourself to be able to lead change.
Yep.
And even if it's change that might be impacting you, you might have to embrace that personally and go through your own change journey before you're even ready to lead that change for others. So, again, another 15 minutes of relay.
Just like that.
Yes. I mean, this topic, we could spend days, and we have, different types of workshops from change and resilience into leading and navigating change and stuff like that on this. So but it's a topic that's incredibly relevant for everything that's going on today. So as always, Renee, great conversation. And,
yes.
We'll continue it next Thursday with a newer topic, or we might dive into one of these topics a little bit more depth.
All right.
So thank you, everybody.